The police arrived at the Carmichael estate at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Neighbors in Brookhaven, Connecticut, didn't call the cops often. This was old money territory, the kind of place where problems got handled quietly, behind tall hedges and iron gates. But when screaming shattered the pre-dawn silence, followed by what sounded like furniture crashing through a window, someone dialed 911. The officers found Nanny number 17 sitting on the front lawn in her nightgown, barefoot in the frost, laughing and crying at the same time. Her suitcase lay open beside her, clothes scattered across the perfectly manicured grass. "They're not children," she kept saying, rocking back and forth. "They're tiny terrorists." Inside the mansion, 2 6-year-olds stood at an upstairs window watching. Jasper's face showed nothing. Delilah smiled. It had taken them 4 days this time. Winston Carmichael built his fortune the new American way, coding in a garage at 23, selling his first company at 29 for $40 million, then building something bigger, Tech Vault Solutions, cloud security for Fortune 500 companies. By 38, he was worth $340 million. The mansion reflected every penny. 12,000 square feet of glass and stone perched on 4 acres overlooking the Sound. Indoor pool, tennis courts, a wine cellar that held bottles worth more than most people's cars. The kind of house featured in Architectural Digest with the headline, "Connecticut's Crown Jewel." But money couldn't solve Winston's problem. 23 nannies in 18 months. The number haunted him during board meetings, international calls, investor presentations. His executive assistant kept a spreadsheet now. Name, start date, end date, reason for departure. The reasons varied, but they all meant the same thing. The twins had won again. Jasper and Delilah Carmichael weren't your typical rich kids acting out. They were strategic, methodical. They studied each new nanny like scientists examining a specimen, identifying weaknesses, planning attacks with the precision of military operations. Nanny number 3 lasted 6 days. She was a stern German woman with 30 years of experience raising diplomats' children in Brussels. The twins reprogrammed the smart home system to blast death metal at 3 a.m., then locked her inside her bedroom. When maintenance finally got the door open, she was gone within the hour. Nanny number 9, a cheerful Australian who claimed she'd handled worse, made it to day 12. Delilah staged an elaborate accident, complete with fake blood made from corn syrup and food coloring, then blamed the nanny for pushing her down the stairs. The woman was fired before she could even defend herself. Nanny number 15 came with references from British royalty. 11 days. They found her weeping in the wine cellar, clutching her resignation letter like a lifeline, mascara streaked down her face. "I've cared for princes," she whispered to Winston's assistant. "But those two, they're something else entirely." The agencies stopped returning calls. Word spread through the tight-knit community of professional childcare workers. The Carmichael twins were blacklisted, a cautionary tale whispered at conferences and training seminars. Winston threw money at the problem. He offered double the going rate, then triple. He promised bonuses, luxury accommodations, company cars. Nothing worked. The twins destroyed them all. His mother, Constance, called every Sunday with the same lecture. "Send them to boarding school. Switzerland has excellent programs. They need structure, discipline, proper British-style education." Winston always said no. He'd lost their mother. He wouldn't lose them too. But as he sat in his home office at 3 in the morning, watching police lights fade down his driveway and another nanny flee his life, Winston Carmichael wondered how much longer he could keep that promise. Upstairs, Jasper closed the curtains. Delilah asked, "How long until the next one?" 2 weeks, Jasper said. "Maybe 3. Dad's running out of options." They high-fived in the darkness. Helena Whitmore arrived at the Carmichael estate with a leather-bound portfolio and the quiet confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything. 47 years old, trained at Norland College in Bath, the same institution that produced nannies for the royal family. She'd spent 2 decades caring for the children of ambassadors, tech billionaires, and a Saudi prince. Her references read like a who's who of global power. "I've managed twins before," she told Winston during the interview, her British accent crisp and precise. "Challenging children are simply children who haven't met the right boundaries." Winston wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe her. Helena lasted 11 days. The first week went suspiciously well. She implemented rigid schedules: breakfast at 7 sharp, lessons at 9, outdoor time at 11. The twins complied without protest. They said please and thank you. They cleaned their plates at dinner. Helena sent Winston daily reports documenting their progress. "I believe we've turned a corner," she wrote on day 8. Structure was all they needed. Winston exhaled for the first time in months. Maybe this was it. Maybe Helena really was different. On day 9, things shifted. Jasper had been watching Helena carefully, studying her routines like he was preparing for an exam. She checked the security system every night at exactly 8:47 p.m., walking through the house, testing locks, arming sensors. She took pride in her thoroughness, often mentioning her security protocols during phone calls with other nannies in her professional network. Pride, Jasper had learned, was useful. That night, after Helena completed her rounds and retired to her room, Jasper slipped into Winston's home office. His father kept the master tablet for the smart home system in the top desk drawer, password protected but laughably easy to crack. Winston used the same password for everything. Caroline's birthday. Jasper's fingers moved across the screen. He'd taught himself coding by watching YouTube videos when he was supposed to be sleeping. Smart home systems were simple once you understood the logic. Just networks talking to each other. And networks could be reprogrammed. He smiled as he worked. At 2:23 a.m., every door in the mansion locked simultaneously. The security system registered an armed intruder. Alarms shrieked through the house, piercing, relentless. Emergency lights strobed in every hallway. Helena bolted from bed, her heart hammering. She ran to the twins' room, locked. She pulled on the handle, screaming their names. Nothing. She ran to Winston's room. He was in Singapore for a conference. She tried the stairs. The motion sensors had activated emergency barriers. Panic clawed at her throat. She was trapped on the second floor. The alarms wouldn't stop. Her hands shook as she called 911, barely coherent. "There's a break-in. Children are locked inside. I can't reach them. Please hurry." Inside their room, Jasper and Delilah sat calmly on their beds, noise-cancelling headphones blocking the chaos. They'd planned this for 3 days. The police arrived within 7 minutes. Firefighters came next. They found Helena hyperventilating in the hallway, convinced the twins had been kidnapped or murdered. When they finally overrode the locks and opened the children's door, Jasper and Delilah were tucked into bed, appearing terrified and confused. "Miss Helena started screaming," Delilah said, her voice small and scared. "We didn't know what was happening. We were so frightened." The system logs showed no evidence of tampering. Winston's security company called it a glitch, rare but possible in smart homes. They apologized profusely and promised system upgrades. Helena knew better. They found her 3 days later in the wine cellar, sitting between bottles of 1982 Bordeaux, worth $18,000 each. She'd been there for 6 hours. Her resignation letter was crumpled in her fist. Mascara streaked down her face like war paint. She was crying and laughing at the same time. "They're not human," she whispered when Winston's assistant finally coaxed her out. "Those children aren't human." Caroline Carmichael died on a Tuesday, 3 days after Christmas, on a mountain she'd skied 100 times before. The twins were 3 years old. Winston was on a conference call with investors in Shanghai. That's the part that haunts him. Not the avalanche, not the closed casket funeral, not even the hollow way his children's laughter disappeared after that day. It's the phone pressed to his ear while his wife took her final run, discussing quarterly projections and market expansion while the woman he loved flew down a slope that would kill her. She'd texted him that morning. "One more run, then hot chocolate with the babies. Love you." He'd sent back a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. Not "I love you too," not "be careful," just a blue thumbs up because he was already late for the call and couldn't be bothered to type actual words. Caroline was an expert skier. She'd grown up in Colorado, spent winters racing down double black diamonds since she was 7. Aspen was her happy place. The 1 week a year she insisted they take as a family, no laptops, no business calls, just snow and hot cocoa and building snowmen with Jasper and Delilah. Winston had broken that rule. He always broke that rule. The avalanche came out of nowhere. Unseasonable weather had destabilized the snowpack. 3 other skiers died that day, but Winston only knew about one. The ski patrol found her 20 minutes after the slide. They said it was instant. They said she didn't suffer. Winston wondered if they told everyone that. He flew home from Aspen with 2 toddlers who kept asking when Mommy was coming back. Jasper stopped talking for 6 weeks. Delilah cried every night, calling for Caroline until her voice went hoarse. Winston hired grief counselors, child psychologists, specialists who spoke in soft voices about trauma and healing. But he couldn't sit in those sessions. Couldn't watch his children draw pictures of their mother or answer questions about their feelings. Every tear they cried was an accusation. Every time they called for Caroline, he heard what they really meant. You weren't there. You were never there. So he did what he knew how to do. He worked. 16-hour days became 18, then 20. He took red-eye flights to London, Tokyo, Dubai. Board meetings bled into investor dinners that stretched past midnight. His executive assistant managed his life in 15-minute increments. There was no room for things that couldn't be scheduled, quantified, solved with money or strategy. The twins became a problem to be managed. He hired nannies the way other CEOs hired consultants. Find the best, pay whatever it takes, trust them to handle it. When the first nanny quit after 2 weeks, he thought it was a fluke. By the 5th, he realized something had broken in his children. By the 15th, he understood something had broken in him, too. He couldn't look at them without seeing Caroline. Delilah had her mother's eyes, that exact shade of green that changed with the light. Jasper had her smile, though Winston rarely saw it anymore. Even their voices carried echoes of her. The way Delilah said "Daddy" with that little lift at the end. The way Jasper tilted his head when he was thinking. Being near them hurt, so he stayed away. His mother called it avoidance. His therapist, the one he'd seen twice before deciding therapy was unproductive, called it unresolved grief. Winston called it survival. The mansion filled with Caroline's absence. Her paintings still hung on the walls. Her books lined the shelves in the study. Her closet remained untouched, clothes arranged by color like she might walk in any moment and choose an outfit. The twins spent hours in that closet sometimes, sitting among her dresses, breathing in the fading scent of her perfume. Winston never went in there, not once in 3 years. Some ghosts, he'd learned, were easier to avoid than face. Jasper and Delilah weren't supposed to be awake at 10:30 on a Thursday night, but the heating vent in their playroom carried sound from the library directly below. That's how they heard Grandmother Constance tell Aunt Patricia that their father was planning to get rid of them. Switzerland, Constance said, her voice sharp and certain. Ashford Academy. I've already spoken with the headmaster. They specialize in difficult children. The twins froze. Delilah's hand found Jasper's in the darkness. Does Winston know you've made contact? Patricia asked. He will. I'm giving him until the end of the month to come to his senses, but we both know he's drowning. 23 nannies, Patricia. 23. He can't handle them. Neither can anyone else, apparently. They're grieving. They lost their mother. We all lost Caroline. Constance's voice turned cold. But grief doesn't excuse destruction. These children are out of control. They need structure, discipline, proper education. British boarding schools have handled far worse. A few years abroad, away from this chaos, and they'll come back civilized. Jasper's jaw clenched. Delilah's fingernails dug into his palm. What if Winston refuses? Patricia asked. He won't. He's exhausted, guilty, and terrified of failing them. Right now, he thinks keeping them here is love. I just need to help him see that sending them away is mercy. For everyone. The sound of ice clinking in crystal glasses, footsteps moving away from the vent. Better they're raised properly in Switzerland than running wild here, destroying everyone who tries to help them. Winston will thank me eventually. They all will. The library door closed. Silence filled the playroom like smoke. Delilah started crying first, quiet, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. Jasper pulled her close, his mind already racing through calculations, strategies, solutions. We can't let them send us away, Delilah whispered. We can't. They won't. You heard her. She's already talked to the school. Dad's going to say yes. He doesn't even want us anymore. Jasper's throat felt tight. He does. He's scared. Of us. Of missing Mom. We remind him of her. Delilah wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her pajamas. So if we go away, he won't have to be sad anymore. The logic was childish and wrong, and exactly what Jasper had been thinking. They were 6 years old, trying to understand why the father who used to read them bedtime stories and build blanket forts now barely looked at them. Why his hugs felt mechanical. Why he was always leaving. "Listen," Jasper said, his voice steadier than he felt. "If Grandmother thinks we're too much trouble here, we need to be so much trouble that Dad can't send us anywhere. But we're already in trouble. That's why—" "Not with Dad, with the nannies." Jasper's mind clicked through possibilities like code compiling. "Think about it. Every time a nanny quits, Dad has to deal with us himself, right? For at least a few days until the next one starts." Delilah's tears slowed. "So if we make them all quit, he has to stay home, he has to be our dad instead of hiding at work. But what if he just sends us away faster?" Jasper had thought of that. The risk made his stomach hurt, but doing nothing meant Switzerland for sure. At least this gave them a chance. "We make it look like the nannies can't handle the job, not that we're bad kids, we're smart about it. We make them think they're the problem, not us." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we figure it out together." Delilah was quiet for a long moment, then she held out her pinky finger. "Promise?" "We stay together no matter what." Jasper linked his pinky with hers. "Promise, together no matter what." They sat in the darkness of the playroom, 2 6-year-olds declaring war on the adults, trying to separate them, believing with desperate certainty that if they could just make themselves impossible enough, their father would have no choice but to love them again. It was the logic of children who'd already lost everything once and would do anything, destroy anything, to keep from losing it again. Margaret Okoye found the job posting at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, scrolling through her phone in a Bridgeport laundromat while her uniforms tumbled in the dryer. She'd worked 3 jobs that day: 6 a.m. cleaning shift at an office complex in Stamford, noon to 6 caring for Mr. Hendricks, an 89-year-old with dementia who thought she was his daughter half the time. Then the overnight shift at Mercy General, changing bedpans and checking vitals while exhausted nurses grabbed whatever sleep they could. At 52, Margaret's body reminded her daily that this pace couldn't last forever. Her knees ached, her back complained every morning. But bills didn't care about aching knees, and her youngest daughter's nursing school tuition wasn't going to pay itself. The posting appeared on a community job board, buried between ads for house cleaners and dog walkers. Experienced caregiver needed for 2 children, age 6, live-in position, Brookhaven, CT, competitive compensation. Must have extraordinary patience and resilience. References required, serious inquiries only. Something about the all-caps must caught her attention. Then the word resilience. People didn't use that word unless they were desperate. Margaret clicked on the full listing. Her eyebrows rose at the salary, nearly triple what she made from all 3 jobs combined. Health insurance included. Private room and bath. 2 weeks paid vacation. Nobody offered that kind of money unless something was deeply wrong. She should have closed the browser. Should have finished her laundry, driven back to her studio apartment in Bridgeport, and gotten whatever sleep she could before her 6 a.m. shift. Margaret had raised 4 children of her own. She knew trouble when she saw it, even in a job posting. But that word kept pulling at her. Resilience. Margaret knew about resilience. She'd left Lagos 30 years ago with $200 and a suitcase. Speaking English she'd learned from BBC radio broadcasts. She'd scrubbed toilets in Manhattan office buildings while studying for her GED. She'd raised 4 babies while working night shifts. Her husband Samuel driving trucks cross-country to make ends meet. When Samuel died 5 years ago, sudden massive heart attack at 52, gone before the ambulance arrived, Margaret had buried him and gone back to work 3 days later because grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her children were grown now. Emmanuel was a software engineer in Boston. Blessing taught middle school in Newark. Kioma had just finished law school. NChem was in her final year of nursing school, which is why Margaret was still working herself to exhaustion at an age when she should be thinking about retirement. She'd done everything right, worked hard, stayed faithful, raised good children who were making something of themselves, and she was still one missed paycheck away from disaster, still doing other people's laundry at midnight in a fluorescent-lit laundromat that smelled like bleach and broken dreams. Margaret read the posting again. Something in that desperate tone felt familiar. She'd heard it in her own voice years ago, when Emmanuel was going through his angry phase after Samuel died. When teachers called saying he was fighting at school, breaking things, refusing to speak. When the school counselor suggested medication and behavioral therapy, and all these solutions that cost money she didn't have. Nobody had helped her then. She'd figured it out alone, sitting on Emmanuel's bed night after night, letting him rage and cry and blame her until he finally understood that anger was just grief with nowhere to go. The dryer buzzed. Margaret pulled out her warm uniforms, folding them with the same careful precision she brought to everything. Then she opened her email and started typing. Dear Sir or Madam, my name is Margaret Okoye. I am writing about your caregiver position. I have over 30 years of experience raising children, though not in the formal way you might expect. She didn't mention her resume, didn't list her credentials or references. Instead, she told the truth. Difficult children are just children who are hurting. If you're looking for someone who can see past the behavior to the pain underneath, I'm interested in talking. She hit send before she could change her mind. Margaret arrived at the Carmichael estate 15 minutes early, driving a 2003 Honda Civic that made concerning noises when she turned left. She'd parked on the street rather than the circular driveway, not wanting to block the entrance with her rusted vehicle. The mansion loomed before her, all glass and sharp angles, the kind of architecture that looked expensive but cold. Through the windows, she could see crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than she'd earned in the last decade. Margaret smoothed her church dress, navy blue, professional, the nicest thing she owned, and walked up the stone pathway. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened. Constance Carmichael stood there in cream-colored linen that probably required dry cleaning, her silver hair styled in a way that screamed country club lunch dates and charity galas. Her eyes traveled from Margaret's face down to her worn shoes and back up again. The pause lasted 3 seconds too long. You're here for the nanny position. Not a question, a statement laced with disbelief. Yes, ma'am. Margaret Okoye. I have an appointment at 2. I see. Constance's lips pressed into a thin line. I wasn't aware my son was expanding his search parameters. The words hung in the air like smoke. Margaret had heard that tone before, in grocery stores, at parent-teacher conferences, in hospital waiting rooms. The careful politeness that barely concealed disgust. She could have left, should have left. This woman had already decided Margaret didn't belong here and nothing was going to change her mind. But Margaret thought about her email, about that desperate job posting, about children who'd chased away 23 caregivers. She thought about Emmanuel at 13, angry and hurting, and how everyone had given up on him except her. May I come in, ma'am? Constance stepped aside with visible reluctance. The foyer was bigger than Margaret's entire apartment. Marble floors, a staircase that curved like something from a movie, artwork on the walls that looked museum quality. You should know, Constance began, leading Margaret toward what appeared to be a sitting room, that this position requires someone with particular qualifications. The children are exceptionally challenging. We've had nannies from the finest agencies in New York, London, even one from the royal household staff. None lasted more than 3 weeks. She sat in a wingback chair, gesturing for Margaret to sit opposite. Margaret noticed she wasn't offered tea or water, though a silver service sat on the side table. These aren't ordinary children acting out, Constance continued. They're manipulative, destructive, and frankly, I'm not certain what my son hopes to accomplish by— She paused, choosing her words carefully. By casting such a wide net. You mean hiring someone like me? Constance's eyebrow arched. I mean hiring someone without formal credentials from established institutions. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. I've raised 4 children, ma'am, all grown now, all doing well. I've worked in elder care, childcare, hospice. I may not have fancy certificates on my wall, but I know children. Do you? Constance leaned forward slightly, because 23 highly qualified professionals thought they knew children too. One was a developmental psychologist with a PhD, another had worked with the British royal family. They all failed, spectacularly. Maybe they were trying to control the children instead of understand them. Excuse me? Margaret met her gaze directly. You keep calling them difficult, challenging. But children aren't difficult, ma'am. They're hurting. There's a difference. Constance's face hardened. That's a very simplistic view. Is it, or is it just true? The silence that followed felt dangerous. Margaret watched emotions flicker across Constance's face, surprise, indignation, something that might have been fear. My grandchildren, Constance said slowly, need structure and discipline. They need boundaries. What they don't need is someone making excuses for their behavior or indulging their every. They need someone who sees them. Margaret's voice stayed gentle but firm. Not their behavior. Them. Constance stood abruptly. I think we're finished here. Does your son know you're conducting this interview instead of him? The question landed like a slap. Constance's composure cracked for just a moment. From somewhere upstairs, a door slammed. Small footsteps thundered across hardwood floors. Margaret looked toward the sound. Constance looked at the door, clearly calculating how quickly she could escort Margaret out. But before either woman could move, Winston Carmichael walked into the room, phone pressed to his ear, and stopped dead when he saw them. Margaret's first morning in the Carmichael mansion started at 6:15 a.m. with Jasper standing silently in her doorway, watching her sleep. She woke to find him there, backlit by the hallway light, motionless as a statue. Most people would have screamed. Margaret just sat up slowly and smiled. Good morning, Jasper. You're up early. He didn't respond, didn't blink, just stared at her with those calculating eyes that looked too old for a 6-year-old face. I'm about to make breakfast. You like pancakes? Still nothing. Then he turned and walked away, footsteps silent on the hardwood. Margaret exhaled. So it begins. Winston had left for Tokyo the night before. Some emergency with a client merger that couldn't wait. He'd barely spoken to Margaret beyond the basics, signing her employment contract with one hand while typing emails with the other. His mother had watched the whole transaction with tight-lipped disapproval before leaving in her Mercedes, throwing Margaret one final warning glance. Now it was just Margaret and the twins in 12,000 square feet of marble and glass. She found them both in the kitchen when she came downstairs. Delilah sat at the island, coloring. Jasper had his tablet, fingers moving across the screen with impressive speed. Good morning, Delilah. The girl looked up, smiled sweetly. Good morning, Miss Margaret. Too sweet. Margaret's internal alarm system activated. She started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, eggs, milk, flour. Her phone sat on the counter where she'd left it, charging overnight. Neither child seemed to pay it any attention, but Margaret noticed Jasper's eyes flick toward it twice while she mixed batter. Can I help? Delilah asked, sliding off her stool. Sure, baby. Want to crack some eggs? While Delilah carefully cracked eggs into a bowl, Margaret watched Jasper in her peripheral vision. His concentration on that tablet was too intense. His posture too casual. She'd seen this before with Emmanuel, the fake disinterest that meant he was planning something. Margaret's phone buzzed, a text from Winston's assistant confirming her first week's direct deposit. She unlocked it to respond, then set it back down to flip pancakes. That's when Jasper made his move. He was fast. Margaret had to give him that. While she had her back turned for maybe 10 seconds, he'd crossed the kitchen, grabbed her phone, and returned to his seat. She only caught the movement because the microwave door reflected the whole room. Margaret kept cooking, didn't turn around, didn't react. Jasper's fingers flew across her phone screen. He'd clearly practiced this. Within 30 seconds, he'd accessed her messages and was typing something. Margaret couldn't see what, but she could guess. Delilah started crying right on cue. Miss Margaret hit me. She pressed her hand against her cheek, the left one, which was now marked with an angry red welt. Margaret turned slowly. Delilah's face was flushed, tears streaming. the mark vivid against her pale skin. Jasper had already set Margaret's phone back on the counter, his face a mask of shock and horror. "She slapped her," Jasper said, his voice trembling perfectly. "I saw it. Delilah asked for chocolate chips in her pancakes, and Miss Margaret got angry and hit her. It was good. Really good." The tears were real. Delilah had worked herself into genuine distress. The mark was positioned exactly where a slap would land. Jasper's testimony was delivered with just the right mix of fear and accusation. They'd done this before, multiple times probably. Practiced it, perfected it. Margaret walked over to Delilah, who flinched dramatically. She knelt down to the girl's eye level, studying the mark, not a slap. The edges were too uniform, the color too evenly distributed. This was pressure, not impact. The child had pinched herself, hard and sustained, probably behind her hand, while Margaret's back was turned. "That looks painful," Margaret said gently. Delilah nodded, fresh tears falling. "When did you do it to yourself?" The crying stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Delilah's eyes went wide. Jasper's head snapped up from his tablet. Margaret stood, walked to the counter and picked up her phone. One new message in her sent folder, time-stamped 3 minutes ago, sent to Winston's number. "Your daughter misbehaved. I disciplined her appropriately. If you have a problem with my methods, we can discuss when you return." Clever. Not an outright confession, but damning enough. Winston would panic, call home, and by the time he reached them, the twins would have their story locked in. Margaret deleted the message. Then she opened the browser history on her phone. "How to send text messages from someone else's phone," she read aloud. "Searched at 6:47 this morning." Jasper's face went pale. Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down across from them, her expression calm, almost amused. "That," she said, "was actually really smart." The twins stared at Margaret like she'd started speaking a different language. "Smart?" Delilah's voice came out small, confused. Her hand still pressed against the red mark on her cheek, but the theatrical crying had completely stopped. Margaret nodded, setting her phone on the table between them. "Very smart. The timing was perfect. Your dad's on a plane to Tokyo, can't be reached for hours. The mark on your cheek looks real. I'm guessing you pinched yourself hard enough to leave a convincing bruise." And the text message was worded just vaguely enough to sound guilty without being an outright confession. Jasper's jaw clenched. His tablet sat forgotten beside him, the screen gone dark. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down, making herself eye-level with them. "This is what happened to—" She paused, thinking back to Winston's exhausted briefing the night before. "Nanny number 9, the woman who got fired after Delilah's fall down the stairs." Neither child answered, but Delilah's eyes dropped to the table. "And probably others. The British woman in the wine cellar. Did you do something similar to her? Make her think she'd failed somehow, that she couldn't keep you safe?" Silence filled the kitchen. The pancakes on the griddle started to burn. Margaret got up calmly, turned off the stove, and scraped them into the trash. "Here's what I don't understand," she said, leaning against the counter. "You're both clearly brilliant. Jasper, you hacked my phone in under a minute. That takes real skill. Delilah, your acting was Oscar-worthy. You even got your breathing to match someone who's genuinely upset." Delilah's chin trembled, but this time it wasn't performance. It was something else. Confusion, maybe, or the beginning of fear that their plan had somehow failed. "So my question is, why?" Margaret crossed her arms, her tone conversational, not accusatory. "Why waste all that intelligence on getting rid of people who are trying to help you?" "You're not trying to help us," Jasper said suddenly, his voice sharp. "You're just here for the money. Everyone is just here for the money." "That's true. I am here for the money." Margaret didn't deny it. "Your father is paying me more than I've ever made in my life. But that doesn't mean I can't also care about you. You don't even know us." "You're right, I don't. Not yet." Margaret pulled out the chair again, sitting back down. "But I know what it looks like when children are in pain. I raised 4 kids. One of them, my son Emmanuel, he was about your age when his father died. Heart attack, sudden. One minute his daddy was there, next minute gone forever." Delilah's eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time. Emmanuel got so angry after that, Margaret continued, her voice soft. He broke things. He yelled at me. Told me he hated me. Got in fights at school. His teachers said he needed medication, therapy, special programs. You know what he really needed? Jasper's defensive posture had shifted slightly. He was listening now, actually listening. He needed someone to understand that all that anger wasn't really anger. It was fear. He was terrified that I'd leave too, that everyone he loved would disappear. So he pushed people away first, before they could leave him. Margaret let that sit for a moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a bird sang. Your mama died 3 years ago, Margaret said gently, skiing accident in Aspen. And your daddy, he's still here, but he's not really here, is he? Delilah's tears spilled over. Jasper's hands clenched into fists on the table. So here's what I think, Margaret continued. I think you heard someone talking about sending you away. Boarding school, maybe? Switzerland? Both children went rigid. And I think you made a plan, a smart plan. Make every nanny quit so your dad has to take care of you himself. Prove you're too much trouble to send away. Margaret paused. Am I close? Jasper's eyes were shining now, though he was fighting hard to keep the tears back. You don't understand. Then help me understand. He doesn't want us anymore, Delilah burst out, her voice breaking. He's always gone, and when he's here, he doesn't even look at us. And grandmother says we're too much trouble, and they're going to send us to school in Switzerland, where we won't see him for months and months, and… She dissolved into sobs. Real, gut-wrenching sobs that shook her whole small body. Jasper's face crumpled. We just wanted him to stay, he whispered. We thought if nobody else could handle us, he'd have to be our dad again. Margaret's heart broke right there in that kitchen. She stood up, walked around the table, and knelt between their chairs. Slowly, carefully, she opened her arms. Come here, babies. For a moment, neither moved. Then Delilah crashed into her, followed by Jasper, and Margaret held them both while they cried like they'd been holding it in for 3 years. Because they had. Margaret held the twins for 17 minutes without saying a word. She'd learned this from her own children. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone who's hurting is silence. No fixing, no advice, just presence. Just arms that say, you're safe here, without using words at all. Delilah cried until there was nothing left, her small body going limp against Margaret's shoulder. Jasper fought it longer. His tears came in angry bursts, punctuated by frustrated attempts to pull away. But Margaret's grip stayed gentle and steady, and eventually he stopped fighting. When the crying finally subsided into hiccups and shaky breaths, Margaret pulled back just enough to look at their faces. Delilah's eyes were swollen and red. Jasper's jaw was still tight, but something had shifted. The calculation was gone. He just looked like what he was, a scared little boy. Better, Margaret asked softly. Delilah nodded against her shoulder. Jasper wiped his nose on his sleeve. Margaret stood slowly, her knees protesting after kneeling on the hard floor. She grabbed a box of tissues from the counter and handed it to them. Then she poured 3 glasses of orange juice and set them on the table. I need to ask you something, she said, sitting back down, and I need you to tell me the truth. Can you do that? Both children nodded, though Jasper's was more hesitant. What are you afraid of? Really afraid of? Not the surface stuff, I already know you're scared of being sent away, but underneath that. What's the thing that wakes you up at night? Delilah looked at Jasper. Some silent twin communication passed between them. You can tell me, Margaret said. Whatever it is, I promise I won't use it against you. That's what the psychologist said, Jasper muttered. Then she told Dad we needed medication. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just someone who's been where you are. Delilah twisted the tissue in her hands, shredding it into tiny pieces. What if we forget her? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Margaret's chest tightened. Your mama? Sometimes I try to remember what her voice sounded like, and I can't. I remember she sang to us at bedtime, but I can't hear the songs anymore. Fresh tears rolled down Delilah's cheeks. What if we go to Switzerland, and when we come back, we don't remember her at all? And Dad will be relieved, Jasper added bitterly, because we remind him of her too much. That's why he can't look at us. We look like her, and it hurts him, And if we're gone, he can just forget and be happy again. There it was, the raw, terrible logic of children trying to make sense of grief they were too young to understand. "Oh, babies," Margaret's voice cracked. "That's not how it works." "Yes, it is," Jasper insisted. "He was different before. He used to play with us and read to us and take us to the park. Now he's just gone. Even when he's here, he's gone. And it's our fault because we look like her and we remind him and—" "Stop." Margaret reached across the table and took both their hands. "Listen to me very carefully. Your father's pain is not your fault, not even a little bit. You understand?" Jasper shook his head stubbornly. "But if we weren't here, if you weren't here, your father would be completely destroyed. You two are the only pieces of your mama he has left. You think he wants to forget her? He's terrified of forgetting her. That's why he can't look at you. Not because you remind him too much, but because you remind him of what he lost, and he doesn't know how to hold that much pain and still function." "So we do hurt him," Delilah said miserably. "No, his grief hurts him. There's a difference. And by pushing everyone away, by making yourselves so difficult that he has to notice you, you're actually making it harder for him to heal. You see that?" Jasper's expression turned defensive again. "So we're supposed to just be good and quiet and let them send us away?" "I didn't say that. I said you're trying to solve the wrong problem." Margaret squeezed their hands. "You can't make your father love you by forcing him to deal with you. That's not love. That's obligation. And you don't want obligation. You want your dad back. But how?" Delilah's voice broke. "How do we get him back?" "Honestly? I don't know yet. But I know it doesn't start with getting rid of me." Margaret gave them a small smile. "Because like it or not, I'm not going anywhere. Not until we figure this out together." Jasper studied her face for a long moment, searching for the lie, the angle, the moment she'd reveal herself to be just like all the others. He didn't find it. "You really mean that?" he said, more statement than question. "I really mean that." "Why?" His voice turned small. "Why do you care?" Margaret thought about Emmanuel, about the nights she'd sat on his bed while he raged against the unfairness of death and absent fathers and a world that kept taking things away. She thought about Samuel and the hole he'd left in their lives. She thought about all the ways grief makes people do terrible things when they're just trying to survive. "Because," she said simply, "somebody cared about my angry kids when they needed it most. And because you're not bad children, you're just children who've been hurt. And hurt children deserve someone who sees the difference." Winston's call came at 2:37 a.m. Connecticut time, which meant it was 3:37 p.m. in Tokyo, and he was likely running on coffee and adrenaline. Margaret's phone buzzed on her nightstand. She answered on the second ring, already sitting up in bed. "Mr. Carmichael." "I got a text." His voice was tight, strained. "From your phone, about disciplining Delilah." "What happened?" Margaret had been expecting this. She'd deleted the fake message, but clearly Jasper had been smart enough to screenshot it first, or the twins had another backup plan she hadn't anticipated. "Nothing happened, sir. Your children tried to frame me for hitting Delilah. They hacked my phone and sent you a fake text message." Silence on the other end, long enough that Margaret thought the call had dropped. "Mr. Carmichael, I need to call you back." He hung up abruptly. Margaret sat in the darkness, knowing exactly what was about to happen. She'd worked for enough wealthy families to understand the dynamics. Winston would call someone he trusted, someone who would tell him what he wanted to hear. He'd call his mother. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Margaret heard the security system beep. The front door opened. Heels clicked across marble with the sharp precision of incoming artillery. Constance Carmichael had a key. Margaret pulled on her robe and headed downstairs. She found Constance in Winston's home office, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a low, urgent voice. "Telling you she's completely unsuitable. I knew it the moment I saw her. These children need professional help, Winston, not some woman who—" She looked up, spotted Margaret in the doorway, and her expression hardened. "I'll call you back." She set the phone down with deliberate care. "You're up late, Mrs. Carmichael." Winston called me, understandably concerned about the welfare of his children. Constance stood, positioning herself between Margaret and the desk, like she was defending territory. "Apparently there was an incident today." Your grandchildren attempted to manipulate the situation. I handled it. Did you put your hands on Delilah? No, Mom. She has a mark on her face. She gave it to herself, pinched her own cheek hard enough to leave a bruise. Then her brother sent a fake text from my phone to make it look like I'd admitted to hitting her. Constance's eyebrow arched. That's quite an accusation to level at 6-year-old children. It's the truth. Or it's a convenient excuse for someone who lost her temper and is now trying to cover her tracks. Constance moved closer, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. I warned Winston about you. I told him that hiring someone from a community job board, someone with no formal training or credentials, was a disaster waiting to happen. And here we are. Margaret held her ground. Here we are on my first day, with your grandchildren still in their beds, safe and unharmed, having finally cried about their mother's death instead of acting out. Excuse me? They broke down this morning, really broke down. Talked about their fears, their grief, why they've been sabotaging every caregiver you've hired. Did you know they overheard you telling someone about sending them to boarding school in Switzerland? Constance's face went pale, then flushed. That conversation was private. Children hear everything, and they've been terrified ever since. That's why they're doing this, not because they're bad, but because they're desperate. How dare you? They think their father doesn't want them anymore. They think they remind him too much of his dead wife, and if they can just make themselves problematic enough, he'll have to keep them home. This is completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate, Margaret said, her voice firm but not raised, is a grandmother who's more concerned with appearances than her grandchildren's emotional well-being. They need help, Mrs. Carmichael. Real help, not boarding school. Not another parade of nannies they can destroy. They need their father, and their father needs to heal. Constance's phone rang. She grabbed it without breaking eye contact with Margaret. Yes. Her expression shifted as she listened. Of course. I'm here now. Yes, she paused. Winston, please think about what you're... Another pause, longer this time. Her jaw tightened. Fine, I'll tell her. She ended the call and set the phone down with controlled precision. My son, she said slowly, each word dripping with barely contained fury, has decided to give you 1 week. 1 week to prove you can handle his children. After that, if there are any further incidents, real or fabricated, you're dismissed and the children will be enrolled at Ashford Academy for the fall term. And you agreed to this? I don't agree to anything. But Winston is their father, and apparently he's still laboring under the delusion that love and patience can fix what clearly requires professional intervention. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. 1 week, Miss Okoye. I'll be watching. And when you fail, not if, when, I'll be there to pick up the pieces and do what should have been done months ago. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Margaret stood alone in the office, the weight of 7 days pressing down on her shoulders. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. When she looked up, she saw 2 small shadows disappear back into their bedroom. The twins had heard everything. Delilah packed her backpack with the practicality of someone who'd thought about running away before. 2 changes of clothes. Her mother's scarf, the silk one that still smelled faintly of perfume if you buried your face in it. The photo from her nightstand showing all 4 of them at the beach before. A bag of goldfish crackers she'd been saving, $23 she'd collected from tooth fairy visits and birthday cards. Jasper watched from his bed, arms crossed. This is stupid. You heard her. 1 week and then we're gone anyway. Switzerland. Months without seeing Dad. Months with strangers who'll make us wear uniforms and speak French and forget everything about Mom. Running away won't change that. Maybe not. But at least we'll be together. Delilah zipped the backpack and pulled it on. You coming or not? Jasper stared at her for a long moment. Logic said stay. Logic said 2 6-year-olds with $23 wouldn't make it far. Logic said this would only make everything worse, but logic hadn't kept them from being sent away. Logic hadn't brought their father back. Logic had failed them at every turn. He grabbed his jacket. They waited until 11:47 p.m., when Margaret's bedroom light had been off for over an hour. The house security system was sophisticated, but Jasper had hacked it weeks ago. Another skill acquired from YouTube videos and too much unsupervised time. He disabled the door sensors from his tablet, and they slipped out the back entrance into the October night. The cold hit immediately. Connecticut in late October wasn't brutal yet, but at midnight it bit through their jackets and turned their breath into visible clouds. Delilah started shivering within minutes. "We should go back," Jasper said. "No." Her teeth chattered. "We keep going." They didn't have a real plan. Head toward town, maybe find somewhere warm to wait until morning. Figure out the next step after that. It was child logic, desperate and incomplete, but it was all they had. 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. By the time they reached Riverside Park, Delilah was crying from the cold. Jasper's hands had gone numb. The playground sat empty under a single streetlight, swings swaying in the wind like ghosts. Delilah collapsed onto a swing, her backpack sliding off her shoulders. "I'm so cold." Jasper wanted to tell her he'd warned her, that this was the stupidest plan they'd ever had, that they should have just accepted their fate. But watching his sister shake and cry on that swing, he felt something crack inside his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what?" "I should have protected you better, should have figured out how to fix Dad. Should have—" "You're 6 years old, Jasper." The voice came from behind them, calm and steady. They spun around to find Margaret standing at the edge of the playground, wrapped in her coat, no panic in her expression. She wasn't running, wasn't yelling, just standing there like she'd been expecting them. "How did you—" Jasper started. "I check on you every night." "Around 11:30. Found your beds empty, security system disabled. Nice work on that, by the way, and figured you hadn't gone far." Margaret walked slowly toward them, unthreatening. "You're smart kids, but you're still kids. You went to the nearest place that felt safe." She sat on the swing next to Delilah. The chains creaked under her weight. "You going to take us back?" Delilah asked miserably. "Eventually, you're freezing and it's almost midnight." "But first, I want to know, where were you planning to go?" "Away," Delilah said. "Away from what?" "From being sent away," her voice cracked. "You heard Grandmother. 1 week and then it's over. We're going to Switzerland and Dad's going to forget about us and—" "Stop." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Nobody's forgetting about you." "You don't know that." "You're right. I don't know that for certain. But I know one thing for sure. Running away won't solve anything. It'll just give your grandmother exactly what she wants. Proof that you're out of control. Proof that you need boarding school." Jasper kicked at the dirt. "So what are we supposed to do? Just wait to be shipped off?" "No. You're supposed to trust me." "We don't know you." "I know. But I'm asking anyway. 1 week. That's what your dad gave me. Give me that same week. Let me try." "Try what?" Jasper's voice was sharp with desperation. "You can't fix this. Nobody can fix this." Margaret stood up, shrugged off her coat, and wrapped it around Delilah's shaking shoulders. Then she knelt in front of Jasper, meeting his eyes directly. "You want to know what I'm going to try? I'm going to try telling your father the truth, that his children aren't the problem, that 23 nannies failed because they were trying to control behavior instead of heal wounds, that you don't need boarding school or medication or more discipline, you need him. He won't listen. Maybe not, but I'm going to make him listen anyway." Margaret held out her hand. "But I can't do that if you two are missing. Can't fight for you if I'm out here searching for you instead of in there planning how to keep you home." Delilah looked at Jasper. Another silent conversation passed between them, the twin language of shared history and shared fear. Finally, Jasper took Margaret's hand. 1 week, he said. 1 week, Margaret agreed. They walked home through the cold October night, 2 children who'd tried to run from their fear and 1 woman who'd followed them into it, and somehow that made all the difference. They didn't go straight home. Margaret led them to a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the park, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since the Carter administration. At midnight on a Wednesday, they were the only customers besides a truck driver at the counter and a waitress who'd clearly seen worse than 2 kids and a woman walking in from the cold. "Hot chocolate," Margaret told the waitress. 3, and whatever pastries you have." The waitress returned with steaming mugs and 2 sad-looking donuts that the twins devoured like they hadn't eaten in days. Margaret wrapped her hands around her mug and watched them, letting the silence settle, letting them warm up from the inside out. Delilah finished first, chocolate mustache on her upper lip. You said you had a son who got angry. Margaret nodded. Emmanuel, my oldest. What happened to him? His father, my husband Samuel, died when Emmanuel was 13. Heart attack, massive and sudden. He was loading groceries into the car and just collapsed. Gone before the ambulance arrived. Jasper looked up from his donut. Like Mom. Similar, yes. 1 minute everything's fine, the next minute your whole world shatters and you don't know how to put the pieces back together. What did Emmanuel do? Delilah asked quietly. Margaret took a sip of her chocolate, remembering. He got angry. So angry, he punched holes in his bedroom walls, broke his father's tools in the garage, got suspended from school for fighting, told me every single day that he hated me. Why? Delilah's eyes went wide. It wasn't your fault. No, it wasn't. But I was there and his father wasn't, and grief doesn't always make sense. When you're hurting that bad, you just want someone to hurt too. Someone to blame. Someone to push away before they can leave you like everyone else has. Jasper's hands tightened around his mug. What did you do? I let him be angry. I let him yell and break things and tell me he hated me. And every single night, after he'd exhausted himself, I'd sit on his bed and I'd say, I know you're scared. I know you think I'm going to leave too. But I'm not going anywhere. You can push as hard as you want and I'll still be here in the morning. Did it work? Delilah whispered. Not right away. It took months, almost a year. But slowly the anger started changing. He'd yell less, break fewer things. And one night, about 10 months after Samuel died, Emmanuel came into my room at 2 in the morning and he just crawled into bed next to me like he was 5 years old again. He cried for 3 hours straight. And when he finally stopped, you know what he said? Both twins shook their heads. He said, I'm not really angry at you, Mama. I'm just so scared of loving people because everyone I love disappears. Margaret's voice caught. That's when I understood. All that destruction, all that rage. It wasn't really anger. It was terror wrapped up in a package that looked like defiance. Jasper's face had gone pale. His jaw trembled. You're not bad kids, Margaret continued, looking directly at him. You're scared kids doing bad things because you think if you're terrible enough, you'll prove something. Either that you're too much trouble to keep, or that you're worth keeping despite being trouble. Either way, someone has to fight for you. A tear slid down Jasper's cheek. He wiped it away angrily. It's not the same, isn't it? You lost your mother, your father's still here, but not really. You're terrified of being sent away, so you make sure everyone else leaves first. You control the abandonment instead of waiting for it to happen to you. Stop, Jasper's voice broke. And the saddest part? Every time you push someone away, every time a nanny quits, you prove to yourselves that you were right. That nobody really wants you. That love is temporary and everyone leaves eventually. I said stop. Jasper stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. The truck driver at the counter looked over, but Margaret waved him off. But here's the truth, baby, Margaret said softly, not moving, not chasing him. Pushing people away doesn't protect you from being alone. It guarantees it. You become so good at making people leave that even the ones who want to stay can't get close enough to love you. Jasper stood frozen in the middle of the diner, his whole body shaking. Delilah started crying quietly into her hot chocolate. What if we can't stop? Jasper whispered. What if we don't know how to not be like this anymore? Margaret stood up slowly and walked over to him. She didn't grab him or force anything, just stood there, arms open, giving him the choice. Then we figure it out together. But you have to let me in first. Both of you. You have to stop fighting long enough to let someone help. For a long moment, Jasper just stood there, every muscle tense, warring with himself. Then, like a dam breaking, he collapsed into Margaret's arms. I miss her, he sobbed. I miss her so much and I can't remember her voice anymore, and I'm so scared that if we leave, we'll forget everything, and it'll be like she never existed at all. Oh, baby. Margaret held him tight while he shattered. Your mama existed. She was real and she loved you, and nothing, not Switzerland, not boarding school, not time, can erase that. Delilah joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them, and they stood in that dingy diner at midnight, 3 people held together by grief and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had finally understood. The waitress brought more hot chocolate without being asked. Some things she'd learned in 20 years of late shifts, you just knew to do. Winston Carmichael came home 3 days early from Tokyo, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Margaret heard his car in the driveway at 6:15 a.m. on Saturday. She was already awake, making breakfast while the twins slept upstairs. Actually slept, peacefully, for the first time since she'd arrived. The past 2 days had been different, calmer. The twins still tested boundaries, but the warfare had stopped. They'd started talking instead of scheming. Winston walked into the kitchen, carrying his briefcase and the weight of the world. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Margaret like he was seeing her for the first time. "My mother called," he said without preamble, "every day. Sometimes twice, telling me you're unsuitable, that the children are getting worse, that I need to make arrangements for Ashford Academy immediately." Margaret cracked eggs into a pan. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what I think anymore." He dropped his briefcase and collapsed into a chair at the kitchen island. "I've hired 23 nannies in 18 months, 23. Every single one has quit or been driven out. My children are 6 years old, and they're already masters of manipulation and psychological warfare. My mother says I'm failing them. My board says I'm distracted. I'm on a plane to Tokyo, and my son is hacking phones to frame the help for abuse. Tell me, Miss Okoye, what am I supposed to think?" Margaret turned off the stove. She plated the eggs, added toast, set the food in front of him along with coffee. Then she sat down across from him and said the thing she'd been preparing to say for 3 days. "You're supposed to think that your children are drowning and you're not there to save them." Winston's head snapped up. "Excuse me. Your children don't need another nanny, Mr. Carmichael. They don't need boarding school or therapy or medication. They need their father. And you're not giving them that." His face flushed. "I'm providing everything. Money isn't parenting. Neither is hiring someone else to do the hard work while you hide behind business calls and international travel. How dare you?" "I dare because someone needs to tell you the truth." Margaret's voice stayed calm, but her words cut clean. "Your wife died 3 years ago, and you're still running from that grief. You can't look at your children because they remind you of what you lost. So you work, you travel. You throw money at the problem and hope someone else will fix what's broken." Winston stood abruptly. "You have no right to speak about my wife. Sit down, Mr. Carmichael." Something in her tone made him pause, made him sit. "Your children tried to run away 2 nights ago," Margaret said quietly. "Did you know that? They packed bags and walked out into the October cold at midnight because they'd rather risk hypothermia than wait to be sent to Switzerland." The color drained from Winston's face. "What?" "They're terrified. They think you don't want them anymore, that they remind you too much of Caroline, and if they could just disappear, you'd finally be happy again." "That's not," his voice cracked. "That's not true." "Then why can't you look at them? Why can't you sit through dinner or read them bedtime stories or ask about their day? Why are you paying me $30,000 to do the job that should be yours?" Winston's hands covered his face. His shoulders shook. "I can't," he whispered. "I look at them and I see her everywhere, and it hurts so much I can't breathe." "I know, but running from that pain is destroying them. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts." He was crying now, silent tears streaming between his fingers. "I don't know how," he said, broken. "I don't know how to be their father without her." "Then you learn, you get help, you stop hiding and you show up, even when it's hard." Winston lowered his hands, his face ravaged. "What if I fail them again?" "You will. Parents always do. But failing while present is better than succeeding while absent." Silence filled the kitchen. Upstairs, floorboards creaked. The twins were awake, listening. Winston looked up at the ceiling, then back at Margaret. "What do I do?" "You call a family therapist. You clear your schedule. You come home. And you let your children see you grieve, because they need permission to grieve too. And if my mother—" "Your mother doesn't get a vote. These are your children." Winston sat there for a long moment, staring at his untouched breakfast. Then he pulled out his phone and started typing. "What are you doing?" Margaret asked. "Cancelling my meetings for the next month and finding a therapist." Margaret nodded. "Good. Now go upstairs and tell your children you're home." He stood slowly, terrified. "What do I say?" "The truth, that you're sorry, that you're scared, that you love them." Winston walked to the stairs, then stopped and looked back. "Thank you, Miss Okoye." "Thank me by showing up, Mr. Carmichael. That's all they've ever wanted." The first dinner together was a disaster. Winston sat at the head of the table that first Saturday night, fork trembling in his hand, unable to meet his children's eyes for more than 3 seconds at a time. Jasper pushed his food around his plate in hostile silence. Delilah asked 17 questions that nobody answered. Margaret watched from the kitchen doorway, refusing to intervene, letting them sit in the uncomfortable truth of what they'd become. It lasted 12 minutes before Winston excused himself, claiming jet lag. The twins looked at Margaret with expressions that said, "See, we told you." But Margaret just smiled. Rome wasn't built in a day, babies. Neither is a family. The second dinner was marginally better. Winston made it 20 minutes, asked Jasper about school, got a one-word answer, tried again. Got silence. By the third week, they were making it through entire meals. Conversation was stilted, careful, like everyone was walking on glass. But they were there, all of them, at the same table, at the same time, small victories. The family therapy sessions started in week 2. Dr. Patricia Chen, a grief specialist who worked out of an office in Westport that smelled like lavender and had tissues strategically placed on every surface. She didn't push, didn't force, just created space for them to exist in their pain together. The first session, nobody spoke for 40 minutes. They just sat there, Dr. Chen waiting patiently, Winston staring at the floor, the twins holding hands on the couch. Finally, Delilah whispered, "Do you wish we looked different? So we wouldn't remind you of Mom?" Winston broke. Right there in that therapist's office, he crumbled and told his children the truth, that looking at them hurt because they were so beautiful and so much like Caroline that it felt like losing her over and over again every single day. "But I don't want you to be different," he sobbed. "You're perfect. You're all I have left of her, and I'm so sorry I made you think I didn't want you." Jasper asked, "Then why did you leave?" "Because I'm a coward. Because grief scared me more than any business deal or investor meeting. Because facing you meant facing the fact that she's really gone and I wasn't ready. It wasn't fixed that day. Healing doesn't work like that. But it was honest. And honesty was a foundation they could build on." Winston started coming home at 6 instead of 10, then 5:30. By month 2, he was leaving the office at 4 to make it home for dinner. His executive assistant had to completely rebuild his calendar, turning down speaking engagements and limiting travel to absolute emergencies. The board wasn't happy. His mother was horrified. Winston stopped caring. He started reading bedtime stories again, hesitant at first, voice cracking when he got to the parts Caroline used to do in funny voices. But the twins would lean against him, one on each side, and eventually his voice steadied. In month 3, Delilah asked if they could look through photos of Mom together. Winston had been avoiding the albums for 3 years, but he said yes. They spent an entire Saturday afternoon on the living room floor, surrounded by pictures, the twins asking questions and Winston answering them even when it hurt. "Tell us about when you met her. Tell us about our birth. Tell us what her laugh sounded like." And Winston told them, every story, every memory, letting Caroline exist in the room with them again instead of as a ghost to be avoided. Jasper stopped hacking into things. His tablet became a tool for coding projects instead of schemes. Delilah's theatrical talents redirected toward the school play instead of fake injuries. The transformation wasn't overnight or complete. They still had bad days, still tested boundaries, still struggled with the weight of their loss. But the sabotage stopped. The warfare ended, because they didn't need to fight for attention anymore. Their father was finally, actually there. Margaret watched it all from a careful distance, doing less and less as Winston learned to do more and more. She'd make dinner but let him serve it. She'd be available but let him handle bedtime. She was transitioning from necessity to support, exactly as it should be. In month 4, Winston hired a grief counselor just for himself, separate from family therapy. He started processing his own trauma instead of projecting it onto his children. In month 5, Constance came for Sunday dinner. She sat rigid and disapproving, watching Winston laugh with his children over some inside joke Margaret didn't understand. Watching him wipe Delilah's face and help Jasper with his homework. Being the father he should have been all along. "I still think boarding school would provide better structure," Constance said as she left. Winston hugged his mother and said, gently but firmly, "They're staying home, Mom. We're figuring this out together." Constance left without another word. She wouldn't interfere again, not because she agreed, but because she'd been overruled. By month 6, the Carmichael house felt different. Lighter. There was laughter in the hallways, art projects on the refrigerator, soccer cleats by the door because Winston had started coaching Delilah's team. Evidence of life being lived instead of survived. Margaret started thinking about leaving, not because things were falling apart, but because they were finally coming together. Her job was never meant to be permanent. She was a bridge between crisis and healing, and the family had crossed to the other side. One evening, after the twins were in bed, Winston found Margaret in the kitchen doing dishes. "I need to tell you something," he said. Margaret's heart sank. She knew what was coming. "I'm getting remarried." That she hadn't expected. Margaret had stayed for 4 years, which was 3 years and 11 months longer than anyone expected. The goodbye party happened on a Saturday in June, the kind of perfect Connecticut day that felt borrowed from a postcard. The backyard was transformed with white tents, string lights, and tables covered in food that Delilah and Jasper had helped plan. Now 10 years old, they'd insisted on Margaret's favorites: jollof rice, plantains, pepper soup that made everyone's eyes water. 50 people showed up: Winston's colleagues, neighbors, teachers from the twin school, Dr. Chen, who'd guided them through 2 years of family therapy before graduating them to monthly check-ins. Even a few of the old nannies, the ones who'd quit early enough to avoid complete psychological destruction, came to witness the impossible. The Carmichael family was healed, not perfect, but whole. Ruth arrived fashionably late, as always, carrying a cake she'd baked herself despite being a terrible baker. She was nothing like Caroline. Where Caroline had been elegant and reserved, Ruth was loud and clumsy and laughed at her own jokes. A pediatrician who worked at the Children's Hospital in New Haven, perpetually covered in stickers from her young patients. The twins had picked her. Winston had been dating for about a year when he'd nervously introduced 3 different women to his children, asking their opinions. Jasper had dismissed the first 2 immediately. One talked too much, the other didn't listen enough. But when Ruth had shown up in scrubs straight from a double shift, sat on the floor to play video games and beaten Jasper at Mario Kart, something clicked. "This one," Delilah had whispered to her father, "she's good." The engagement had happened 6 months ago. The wedding was planned for August, and Ruth had been the one to gently suggest that maybe it was time for Margaret to go home, to rest, to live a life that wasn't centered around someone else's family. "You gave us our father back," Ruth had said during a private conversation last month. "Now let me give you your life back." Margaret watched the party from the shade of an oak tree, letting the celebration happen around her. Emmanuel had driven up from Boston with his wife and 2 daughters, Margaret's grandbabies, who called her Nana and didn't understand why she lived so far away. Blessing was there from Newark. Kioma had flown in from Atlanta, where she practiced law. Enkem had finished nursing school and was working at the same hospital as Ruth. Margaret's children, all grown, all successful, all there to take her home. Winston found her under the tree, 2 glasses of lemonade in his hands. He'd aged in 4 years, more grey at his temples, lines around his eyes, but he looked lighter somehow, present in his own skin. "You're hiding," he said, handing her a glass, "just watching." They stood in comfortable silence, observing Jasper teach Ruth's nephew some kind of complicated card trick, while Delilah organized the younger kids into teams for relay races. "I never thanked you properly," Winston said finally. "You thank me every week with a paycheck." "That's not what I mean." He turned to face her. "You saved my family. You saved me. When everyone else saw broken children, you saw children who were breaking. That perspective, That grace, it changed everything. Margaret smiled. I didn't save anyone, Mr. Carmichael. I just helped you see what was already there. Winston, after 4 years, I think you can call me Winston. Old habits. He laughed, then grew serious. What will you do after this? Rest, spend time with my grandchildren. Maybe take that trip to Nigeria I've been postponing for 30 years. She paused. Live a little. You deserve that. So do you. Ruth is good for you, good for them. She's terrified she can't measure up to you. Then tell her she's not supposed to. I was the bridge. She's the foundation. Different jobs entirely. Delilah appeared suddenly, crashing into Margaret with the force of a small hurricane. You can't leave yet. We haven't cut the cake. I'm not leaving yet, baby. Promise you'll visit. Promise you'll call every week. Promise you won't forget about us. Margaret knelt down, bringing herself eye level with the girl who'd grown 4 inches in the past year and lost most of her baby softness. I could never forget about you. Jasper joined them, characteristically more reserved, but no less affected. It won't be the same without you. No, it won't. It'll be different, but different can still be good. Will you come to the wedding? Delilah asked. Please? We want you there. Margaret looked at Winston, who nodded. Front row. Reserved seat. Then I'll be there. As the afternoon faded into evening and the party shifted into that golden hour where everything looks softer, Margaret found herself surrounded by everyone at once. Winston and Ruth, the twins, her own children, even Constance, who'd shown up late and stayed in the background, but whose presence felt like a grudging acceptance. Someone called for speeches. Winston stood on the patio, glass raised, and the crowd quieted. 4 years ago, he began, I was drowning. My children were drowning. We were all so lost in grief that we couldn't find our way back to each other. And then Margaret Okoye answered a desperate job posting and changed everything. Delilah was crying. Jasper's jaw was tight, fighting tears. She didn't fix us with techniques or credentials or professional expertise. She fixed us by seeing us, really seeing us, the hurt underneath the behavior, the love underneath the fear, and she refused to let us hide from each other anymore. He raised his glass higher. To Margaret, who taught us that healing isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. To Margaret, everyone echoed. Later, as guests began leaving and the sun finally set, Delilah found Margaret alone by the garden, looking at the roses Caroline had planted years ago and Winston had finally started tending again. You're really leaving tomorrow? Delilah's voice was small. Yes, baby. I don't want you to go. Margaret pulled her close. I know, but you don't need me anymore. You have your dad, you have Ruth, you have each other. We had each other before, but we needed you to show us how to see it. From the mouths of 10-year-olds, Margaret thought, come the deepest truths. You taught your father how to come back, Margaret said, echoing the words she'd said years ago in this very garden. You just needed someone to translate. Delilah looked up at her, tears on her cheeks. No. You taught us that we were worth coming back to. That's different. Maybe it was. Maybe the truth lived somewhere between both versions. Children teaching parents, parents teaching children, all of them stumbling toward each other through grief and fear and the terrifying vulnerability of love. Margaret left the next morning with 4 years of memories, a family photo the twins had framed for her, and the quiet satisfaction of a job completed. In her rearview mirror, the Carmichael mansion grew smaller. Not a fortress of failure anymore, just a home where a family was learning to live again. And that, Margaret thought as she drove toward her own children, her own life, her own long-postponed rest, that was everything.